Good. You've already mentioned the other forgotten wars in Sudan, and then there's renewed violence in the DRC as well, and an upsurge of fighting in Myanmar. I mean, one of the challenges, it seems, in relation to all of these conflicts is that no third-party governments, regional organizations, or the UN itself have been capable of preventing them or of bringing them to a close. The last successful UN negotiation, for example, was the Colombian peace agreement in 2016. So what do you think is behind all this? Is it the sort of the changing nature of armed conflict, or a real inability for governments as third parties, regional organizations, or the UN to grapple with them as they are emerging and as they become full-blown conflicts?
And, you know, to what extent was Colombia itself, quote, a success for the UN? I mean, the Colombia settlement came about because, to everyone's amazement, a man who had been a hardline security minister, Juan Manuel Santos, in President Uribe's government, turned around and put out an arm to say, I'm prepared to talk. And I once said to him, because I got to know him when I was at UNDP, and he sits on the elders with me today, I said to him, what explains what you did? Because you had a reputation for being a very hardline security minister. You know, you were after the FARC. You know, there were a lot of deaths. You're fully militarized. He said, look, he said, my story goes like this. He said, in the 90s, when I was a minister, I went to Geneva for a conference. And I heard Nelson Mandela talk about his life and what he'd done in South Africa. He said, and I sat there and I thought, if I ever had the chance to do that for my country, would I do it? He said, but I couldn't say anything because I would never have been elected president. When I was elected president, I thought, this is the opportunity I have. And it wasn't easy going. You might remember that initially when they negotiated a deal, they put it to a referendum and the public knocked it back, with his old president, Uribe, in full cry against him. But I really credit Santos with the maturity and vision, and he got a Nobel Peace Prize for his pains with driving that through. I knew the UNDP rep, who was also UN resident coordinator at the time, very well, and he was a behind-the-scenes person as well. And I remember going to dinner with one of the ministers who was almost full-time on the case. And let's not overlook the role of the Cubans who hosted the talks and kept the FARC there. The FARC sat in hotels in Cuba, in Havana, for probably a couple of years while this was done. But they kept them on side. But the minister, who was pretty focused on it, started talking about the negotiations and where they were at, and he said to me, you know, he said that the most humiliating thing to me about it all, he said, is what they want is so little. We've been fighting a civil war for half a century over, in effect, land issues. He said it's ridiculous and it has to stop. So anyway, I mean, yes, the UN was helpful, but in the end, I think there were local actors that really drove this through. But anyway, as for the rest of it, if we've knocked that one out, how far back do we have to go? I think, you know, for quite a while now, the UN has often looked to the regional actors to try to lead on conflict resolution. But the regional actors are weak. So take ASEAN with Myanmar. Well, you know, ASEAN works by consensus, and the consensus may be quite a low-level denominator. And there are countries in ASEAN which aren't particularly prepared to call Myanmar out, because clearly ASEAN itself has a range of political systems, so that hasn't been easy. And while they had the 5-point consensus, it proved almost impossible to move forward on that. The UN has been very much a bit player. I think it's on its third special representative, the Secretary General to the conflicts since the military coup. Now Julie Bishop, the former Australian Foreign Minister, who I saw in New York, and Julie's very energetic and she's moving around talking to a lot of people, yet to be received in Naypyidaw. But I mean, the battlefield, as it were, is quite interesting, with the opposition making a lot of ground. But, you know, if you look at other conflicts, if the military get too much on the back foot, when do other actors come in with new technologies which enable the military to turn the tide again, as we saw with Tigray in northern Ethiopia or in any number of conflicts? So I think there's been an attitude among some in the resistance that now's not the time to talk because, you know, they may make more ground. I'm not so sure about that. I think that, you know, there could be a stepped up militarisation of the conflict, and in a way it's never too early to talk if you're interested in saving lives and stopping people getting horribly maimed and so on. So anyway, not much happening on that score at the moment. The UN peacekeeping missions seem to pretty much run their course. We're far away from the heyday of the Brahimi report and Kofi Annan's, you know, new agenda for peace and whatever. The mission was kicked out of Mali in the last year or so. It's been kicked out of Democratic Republic of Congo. Of course, left Haiti. They're now trying to work out what they do again with Haiti, which seems to be ruled by criminal gangs more than anyone else. But it's not great. In West Africa, AUKUS, the regional organisation, did try to stand up to the series of military coups, but for its pains, the three countries who had coups left the organisation: Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger. And their security is now provided by our old friends, the Wagner Group, alias Russian military. So, yeah, it's not good. And the UN is not seen as playing really a key role in resolving any of this.
Well, why do you think that's so? Why is the UN, which is tasked with the responsibility of maintaining international peace and security and generating positive peace and so forth, is so incapable at the moment and seems so paralyzed in so many different fronts? And you know, and Guterres makes the right comments, you know, and statements about things that are happening, but you know, he himself is now, you know, excluded from visiting Israel, the Middle East, by Netanyahu. So what is it about the UN which is, you know, disabling it to do the things it was meant to do? And do you want to make a brief comments about the Summit for the Future, which, you know, some people think might have provided an opportunity for thinking afresh about UN reforms, and yet when you look at the action points in the Pact for the Future and so forth and international security, they seem high on rhetoric and low on substance.
Mm. Well, you know, when the UN was founded, it was against, you know, it was sort of in the ashes of World War II, right? You've had the end of the war in Europe, the end of the war in Japan and the Pacific. And I think the vision was to stop another world war between great powers. And, you know, we could be Pollyanna and say, there hasn't been another war between great powers. However, we hover perilously close. But what it hasn't proved very adept at doing is dealing with different types of conflicts, the civil wars, the non-state actors. The whole peacekeeping architecture really isn't very well adapted to that. And there's been a lot of ideas about that. There's also the case that a lot of countries that are fragile and at risk of lapsing into further conflict are desperately poor. And it's hard to make, you know, a decent, honest living, which means that where you have well-financed non-state actors who are involved in, you know, smuggling, whether of people or contraband goods or arms or whatever, you can conscript young people to the task, and you've really got a lot of poverty and, you know, extreme underdevelopment driving these situations. And so often we sort of stretch for the military toolkit rather than going back and saying, excuse me, what is the origin of this? What is driving this bubbling up and simmering conflict in countries? And it's hard really to get the support you need for the basic peace-building work on the ground you know, in the end, you know, the plate is put around, like at the end of the Sunday church service, for humanitarian relief, and that's never quite enough, but it comes to some degree. But investment in the basic, you know, precursors of peace, which is, you know, a sense that you have an opportunity, a stake in society, a livelihood, you can get your education, your kids can get their education, you've got healthcare and so on. That the world's not so generous on these things. So we keep, you know, going on in this spiral. Now, on the pact for the future, again, you could be Pollyanna. And Pollyanna would say it's a wide-ranging document, that touches on all the important issues, and there's hooks on it, you know, like, you know, a Christmas tree where you can dress it up over time if you've got determined, you know, issue-based coalitions of states that are prepared to pick up things and run with them. I must say, if you read through the Pact for the Future, there's not a single binding action in it. And it has more than 50 actions, but there's no action. Right? You read through it, you know, we will protect all civilians in armed conflict. Or could they start today? People in humanitarian environments will get the support they need today. I mean, you know, there's no money, there's no requirement, there's no mechanism. It's really quite sad. And, you know, I mean, obviously the Russians are getting a lot of blame for holding the thing up till the end, but I mean, really, that's all a bit irrelevant. This is a weak document. I mean, it doesn't point to a review conference of the UN to deal with some of the issues. So, I mean, all I can say is there's never been a time with a greater need for small powers, medium powers coming together around the things that need to be done and trying to, you know, build up campaigns for these in the multilateral system, because otherwise the UN will continue to drift and drift.